From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. In Mexico, the U.S. Border Patrol has arrested 42 migrants who managed to cross the border into the United States on Sunday. The majority of those detained were men. They were part of a group of about 500 mostly Honduran migrants who approached the San Isidro crossing in Tijuana. Most were driven back with tear gas, but some of them appeared to have got through a point where a small section of the wall was torn down. The outgoing Mexican government now says it is deporting 93 of the migrants involved in Sunday's confrontation. Our correspondent Alina Duarte is on the Mexican side of the crossing a day after violence erupted there.
We are by the bridge that leads to the San Isidro border crossing. This is one of the busiest crossings on the border with Mexico. Hundreds of migrants have gathered here. They came from the shelter where more than 5,000 of them are now staying. The Mexican federal police have blocked their path. They want to let the U.S. government know that they are here to request asylum, even though their request could take months to process. It seems like this is as close to the border as they're going to get today. On their way here, they thanked the Mexican people and the city of Tijuana for the hospitality they have received, and they also asked for forgiveness for any inconvenience they might have caused. Nonetheless, they have repeated their intentions to try to reach the United States, or their intention to remain peacefully here in Mexico if they are given work. This seems to be the route being sought by the new government that will take office here in less than a week from now, with Andrés Manuel López Obrador as president. Many of these migrants have already been here in Tijuana for 2 weeks, and they're getting quite desperate because the U.S. authorities have not responded to their requests. Some of them want to get closer to the border, but as I said, the Mexican police are blocking their path.
Thank you, Alina, for that report. The violence on Sunday began after a peaceful demonstration by migrants approached the border crossing. The U.S. Border Patrol fired tear gas and, according to some reports, rubber bullets, as some of the demonstrators got past Mexican security forces and headed to the San Isidro crossing. Women and children were seen trying to escape from the gas.
We were all together, and they started throwing tear gas, and they hit a journalist in the head.
We were walking and telling the US border officers not to throw tear gas at us because we weren't doing anything, and they started throwing bombs at us. All the police and cameramen were there.
We went near the border in a peaceful march, and the American officers got upset because we were too close to the border. The alarm went off, and they began throwing tear gas at us. A lot of people started to go down. A person got hit, and lots of kids fainted. So some people got rocks and threw it at the officers because many kids were fainting. We just took them to the doctor, and now we are coming back, and there's still tear gas. I don't know what happened just now.
These images show migrants running from tear gas at the border crossing. President Trump said last week that he authorized the U.S. military to use lethal force against the migrants if necessary, but no military personnel took part in Sunday's violence. Trump also threatened to close the entire border with Mexico. Other Central American migrants are in Tijuana awaiting word on their asylum request. Many migrants want to cross despite the xenophobic and anti-immigrant policies in the U.S. Donald Trump has tried to prevent them from entering the country and said the migrants who enter illegally from Mexico will not be allowed to apply for asylum. This despite the fact that a judge temporarily suspended his order.
We are desperate, waiting for a positive response. We hope that the authorities can come to an agreement. It is not our intention to dismiss Mexican people. Our hope is to receive news for Christmas. Good news for my family back in Honduras.
Representative-elect for the Democratic Party, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, has asserted that migrants cannot be criminalized. In her social media channels, Ocasio-Cortez recalled that migrants built the U.S., showing that seemingly impossible is in fact possible. She also pointed out that when the United States denies migrants, it denies its own essence. She added that in the heart of society, there are migrants who have earned Nobel as artists and tradesmen. Mexican President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador has called on the armed forces to help fight violence, corruption, and insecurity in the country. This is the first time an elected president has met with the military before taking office. His speech was directed to the Navy. López Obrador has creating a national guard, unifying different security forces.
Currently, according to our constitution, armed forces cannot participate in public security tasks, neither the Army nor the Navy. So, how are we going to face this problem if there is no constitutional reform?
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Earth. Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Buenos Aires is preparing for an intense week of demonstrations ahead of the G20 Leaders Summit, which will be held next Friday and Saturday. Almost all political parties, trade unions, social movements, and human rights organizations against President Macri will be part of various demonstrations in rejection of the current state of affairs in the country. Meanwhile, Security Minister Patricia Bullrich has unveiled a multi-million-dollar policing operation before the summit. It is anticipated that during the protests, a large portion of public transportation will be affected. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Edgardo Esteban, has more.
An intense week of demonstrations in Buenos Aires began this Monday in rejection of the G20 leaders' presence in the city next Friday and Saturday. Workers, social movements, and human rights organizations have walked from Buenos Aires downtown area to the State House of Buenos Aires province and to that of Córdoba province as well, in rejection of the security operation and the murders of two social leaders. They are hoping to show the increase of repressive measures on the streets, as more than 22,000 policemen are expected to be part of the G20 leaders' security deployment, who will also play a role in trying to contain social mobilization against the G20 summit and Argentina's accord with IMF.
Argentina's workers' unions are demanding justice after another one of their members was killed by police. The death of Marco Jesus Soria has sparked protests in Buenos Aires. Police claim the young man was involved in an attempted robbery. However, the organization is strongly denying this version of events. The group says Soria was brutally beaten by two officers. When he tried to escape, he was shot in the back. Residents of Colombia's San Lorenzo municipality have voted against mining exploitation in the region. More than 6,000 people have voted against mining, according to the Electoral Observation Mission. Another municipality is also preparing a similar vote in order to decide whether they want mining in their own territory. 1 year has passed since Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernández was re-elected in controversy. The opposition called the elections a fraud because re-election was not permitted by the country's constitution. But a court decision allowed back in 2015, the president has recently been accused of embezzlement to fund his electoral campaigns. His brother was also recently arrested in the U.S., accused of having links with drug traffickers. Members of Congress in Brazil have expressed their gratitude to Cuban doctors for their service in the More Doctors program. The Cuban government decided to end the program after President-elect Jair Bolsonaro sought to change the terms of the mission and insulted the Cuban medical personnel.
The departure of 8,500 Cuban doctors has Brazilian lawmakers worried.
It's very serious because now we have 1,600 towns in Brazil without doctors, because the Cubans were the only doctors there. The attack by the future government of Bolsonaro against Cuba, which led the Cuban government to withdraw in order to protect their doctors and their people, is part of an ideological war.
The members of Congress offered their thanks to the Cuban medical teams at a meeting called to discuss the challenges posed by the election of Jair Bolsonaro. They say his government will be neoliberal and neo-fascist.
He is stirring up hatred and spreading disinformation. It's a big step backwards. So I think this is another cause we all need to struggle for in the coming period, to defend these doctors and fight for the program to be restarted.
Jair Bolsonaro made disparaging comments about the Cuban doctors and demanded they undergo tests to evaluate their professional ability, even though they've already treated 113 million patients in 3,600 Brazilian municipalities and are present in 67 countries through the Pan American Health Organization.
Their professional skills are at least as good as Brazilian doctors, so this was a humiliation, a way of getting rid of them, and now these communities are left abandoned.
In the middle of the transition to the Bolsonaro government, Brazil is losing 8,500 Cuban doctors, and there's no one to replace them in the favelas and remote rural regions where Brazilian doctors refuse to work.
6 people were killed at the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic after an argument. We warn that the images you are about to see may be disturbing to some viewers. Haitian police has confirmed that 4 customs officers and 2 civilians died Saturday in the town of Malpaz. A police officer had shot a person who tried to cross the border with merchandise without stopping. A group of civilians then retaliated by setting a barricade on fire. The killings come as Haiti faces week-long anti-corruption protests. As Costa Rica's general strike continues more than 60 days, the country's legislative assembly is set to debate the government's tax reform once again. Our correspondent in San Jose, Fernando Francia, has the details.
A debate is set to take place this Monday on the proposed tax reform after the Constitutional Court gave the go-ahead on Friday. It is expected that the court's resolution will arrive this week to the General Assembly for final approval, a resolution that also includes the tax reform. On the other hand, various unions and organizations have been on strike for over 65 days now, hoping to put an end to the proposed tax reform, which will see an increase for basic necessities. Nonetheless, it is expected that the tax reform will be approved in the coming days.
Thank you, Fernando, for that report. Sunday, November 25th, was the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And in Quito, Ecuador, more than 10,000 people marched to raise awareness about the different forms of violence Ecuadorian women face on a daily basis. People of all ages and backgrounds gathered to protest domestic violence, sexual abuse, and harassment against women. They demanded equal rights in the workplace.
We are here to resist because the government continues to be negligent with our lives, with our vulnerabilities. There are more than 1 million people missing. For the government, it doesn't matter that women are dying. The justice system does nothing, and sexual abuse keeps happening, which is just simple. outrageous. This march is our way to say that we are fed up and we are a community fighting for our justice together, a feminist justice.
The Dominican Republic also marked the day with a huge protest. In the capital, Santo Domingo, women gathered to protest against all forms of violence. November 25th, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, was first set to honor the three Maribel sisters who were murdered in the Dominican Republic by the Trujillo dictatorship. Now women across the globe take to the streets every year to raise awareness about violence.
On a daily basis, women face a plethora of sexist microaggressions, usually more than just a single instance of harassment or one offhanded comment. They're often so common and normalized that women themselves often don't recognize them, and so subtle that men don't notice them happening.
In our work, women are often oppressed with phrases that diminish their ability. They are told they can't do certain tasks because they are women, or they are told they need to take care of their homes and therefore don't have time to work.
Language is one of the most powerful means through which sexism and gender discrimination perpetuated and reproduced. Yet, sexist language is often overlooked and even accepted by both men and women.
In movements such as ours, we try to include women more often so they can learn about microaggressions, so they let go of the fear of speaking out, so they know they can do it. We teach them what options are available to them. This is a very difficult task, but we have been fighting this battle for years.
The threat of workplace violence also cannot be ignored. It can range from verbal abuse and threats to physical assaults and even homicide. Women who work in informal sectors are particularly susceptible to this type of abuse and exploitation. Many are also economically dependent on their families or intimate partners.
Over 60% of informal workers are women over 40. They have very little access to a normal job. Women over 35 are not wanted for most positions.
Then there's a persistent gender wage gap, where women in Colombia end up earning up to 14% less than their male counterparts. Additionally, women in the workforce occupy only 20% of managerial positions.
Women in Colombia, we have a higher education level than men, and yet we are not considered for many jobs.
Femicide is perhaps the most extreme form of gender-based violence. Colombia has recorded nearly 35,000, and impunity for femicide is routine because violence against women is viewed as a lesser issue. In the first half of 2018 alone, 400 women were murdered.
We have condemned all femicides and demand that the government gives us safety guarantees. There needs to be an anti-patriarchal justice system to defend women, not victimize them.
The statistics are alarming. 30 women social leaders have been murdered so far in the year. Those victims were in the forefront in the fight to build peaceful communities while promoting gender equality.
And just one day after women around the world raised their voices against gender violence, comes news that in Argentina, 3 men accused of the 2016 rape and murder of 16-year-old Lucia Perez received a slap on the wrist. The prosecutor failed to secure rape and murder convictions in the case. 2 of the accused received 8 years, but only for narcotics possession. Women's movements have already begun mobilizing for a nationwide strike. We'll take a short break now. Don't go away.
The ruling world order has always subjugated the masses. But who are the actors behind every move? What are their real interests? We analyze every move on Critical Move. Weekdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. The South African Federation of Trade Unions has rejected the $300 minimum wage announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa. In a statement, the federation claims the minimum wage is not enough to meet basic needs of the workers and will drive millions of workers to poverty. The new minimum wage is expected to come into effect on the 1st of January 2019. The final debate is due to take place for the parliamentary elections in the southern Spanish province of Andalusia. The four main political leaders are getting ready for the last debate before elections due to be held on December 2nd. The debate will be held on a public television and will be divided into four blocks: the economy, public services, transparency, and territorial concerns. At the moment, polls suggest a victory for the Socialist Party, the current party in power. Now let's take a look at some other stories making headlines from around the world.
In France, Yellow Vest protesters have maintained their presence in the city of Dunkirk in the north of the city. They have said they will not stop protesting until President Emmanuel Macron resigns. Protests over fuel taxes have become more frequent and at times violent since starting on November 17th. One person has died in the demonstrations. Japanese car company Mitsubishi has fired businessman Carlos Ghosn from his role as a chairman and representative director. Ghosn was dismissed after his arrest in Japan for alleged financial misconduct. He has already been sacked as a chairman of Nissan and now faces questioning in a Tokyo detention center.
Keeping Mr. Carlos Ghosn on the board and in the post of company chairman and representative director risks the firm's reputation.
A huge sandstorm has hit the Gansu province in northern China. A yellow cloud covered the region, causing fires, and security forces have to be deployed to ensure residents' safety. Visibility in the affected area was reduced to less than 100 meters.
And we come to the end of this news brief. These and many other stories you can find at our website at telesurienglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.